So, according to your opinion, what is the definition of Islamic State?
It's many things, but up to a certain point it's absolutely a terrorist group, but not only a terrorist organization, it is also ideologically a Salafist jihadist group, just like Al-Qaeda, for instance, but it is also a different political entity, because it is terrorist, it is jihadist, but it is also based on territorial conquer. So this is not the real state, but since a year ago at least, it is a state de facto, not by de jure, but it has many things that a common state has. So there is no common definition for what ISIS is now at this moment, in a political science point of view, but it is not a state, a normal state, but it is a jihadist organization with many aspects common to the state. So it is a jihadist state de facto.
Okay. Religion is a fundamental part of this organization. Do you think that religion is used as a basis when the real basis lies on money? Which is the proportion between them?
I think we in the West do a huge mistake if we are thinking on ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram only by our regular patterns, like money. No, it is not like that. ISIS has a basis from a religious and ideological point of view, very real strong. It is, ideologically speaking, a Salafist jihadist organization ruled by Takfiri doctrine, saying that, well, their main goal is the return to the first Muslim practices coming, according to their interpretation, coming from the Prophet Muhammad. So they make only distinction between the believers and the infidels. And by this doctrine, they also legitimize violence against those Muslims that are not Salafists, they are not jihadists. So that's why most of their victims are Muslims. And in the ISIS case, they are even more exclusive. They have a more exclusive ideology than, for instance, Al-Qaeda, because they don't accept no other kind of Islamic interpretations. So what they are trying to do in their own strategy is to kill and promote a war inside Islam, mainly from against Shia, from the Sunni against Shia, because Salafism jihadism is a radical movement from the Sunnis against Shia. So this is a kind of a more radical approach than Al-Qaeda. And on the other hand, while Al-Qaeda is mainly a jihadist and terrorist organization, diffuse, dispersed, since the beginning, the Islamic State in Iraq, and then ISIS, and now the Islamic State Caliphate, is trying to immediately create an Islamic State Caliphate. That's what they declared in June 2014. So they, of course, they have this religious basis. They instrumentalize this as they instrumentalize rivalries between Sunni and Shias. They instrumentalize those people, including former officials from the old Iraq military, attracting Sunni tribes and attracting many foreign fighters, including with the propaganda, recruitment, and radicalization through the internet. Of course, some of these foreign fighters is coming to Iraq and Syria, fighting probably because of money. Some of them, but only a few. I believe most of them are, including those who are called now express jihadists, self-radicalized through internet, are going mainly because of this different worldview coming from the Salafist jihadist vision.
You partly answered to my next question, but I ask you, what kind of relationship exists between Al-Qaeda and Islamic State? That is, are they allies or are they in war against one another?
They were for years allies. You know, in the very beginning of what is now Islamic State, there are several jihadist groups related with Al-Qaeda. And when, after the invasion of Iraq by the United States in 2003, this group associated to Al-Qaeda and started to be called Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And at the same time, a few years later, in 2006, a side of the Al-Qaeda in Iraq was created, the Islamic State in Iraq. So, with a lot of coordination, with a lot of connections, including with Central Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda core. But then we have some changes, important changes in the context of Iraq, in the context of Syria, as well in the regional context. Starting from 2011, what we have is withdrawal from the United States from Iraq, the killing of bin Laden, the symbol of the world jihadism, and the Arab Spring, and in particular the civil war in Syria. These conditions promoted stronger ISIS in Iraq, and then in 2013 ISIS expanded to Syria. And then when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the so-called now Caliph Ibrahim, expanded ISIS to Syria, creating ISIS, he also proposed that the Al-Nusra Front should be dissolved inside ISIS. Both Al-Nusra as well Al-Qaeda core refused this move, but the question is that ISIS state expanded in Syria, and since the end of 2013, the beginning of 2014, they are fighting each other. Not only in Syria, as well in Iraq, but now we are seeing this fight also in Yemen, also in Afghanistan, and in Lebanon, in Libya, and other countries. So they are fighting now, these two organizations, by recruiting militants, by recruiting Sunni militants for their sides. They are fighting also for money, but they are fighting also for the main brand of world jihadism. And I think this is dangerous, not only for some countries and conflicts, as well for our countries, because they are trying to do some main attacks to show how strong they are, these two brands. As you know, both Al-Qaeda core and several jihadist groups affiliates in Al-Qaeda refused ISIS, refused the Caliphate Islamic State, but we never know. Sometimes they are very pragmatic, and in certain conditions they can cooperate, but I think in most cases they are competing, because it is impossible for Al-Qaeda and many other jihadist groups to accept the global authority from the Caliph Ibrahim. So I just don't see how this is possible, just like I cannot see in any other possibility of, for instance, Shia militias or Hezbollah cooperate really with ISIS or with Al-Qaeda, because they are completely different perspectives. It's not the case between Al-Qaeda and ISIS or the Islamic State, but I think there are more conditions for competition right now than for cooperation. Only if the Islamic State set back or Al-Qaeda would be too weak, maybe then they could be allies, not in the conditions that we know now.
The Italian media are currently talking about Islamic State infiltrators as immigrants from Libya and from North Africa generally. Do you think that this is a reasonable and justifiable fear? And in your opinion, what are the actual risks and consequences for Italy?
Well, that is one of the dangers, of course, not just now, but now we have several conditions that ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other groups instrumentalize. We have a complete collapsed state in Libya. We have a huge pressure coming from migrants from South Mediterranean to North part of the Mediterranean. And in February, the Islamic State make this threat saying that they could send their fidels to inside their enemies in Europe, profiting this pressure and these migrants. So this is a real threat. However, I would say that at least now the major threat is not from the people outside coming to Europe, because our intelligence services, our systems of security are well aware to keep our borders, to keep surveillance on these people coming from the outside. Of course, if you have, for instance, probably 250,000 people coming in just 1 year from Europe through Mediterranean, you have much more chances of having also ISIS or jihadists infiltrated. But main threat, in my point of view now, is the jihadist Europeans, those particular who are fighting in Iraq and Syria. We are talking about more than 25,000 foreign fighters in territory controlled by Islamic State, and just from the European Union are more than 6,000 from more than 20 countries. So the question is, it is too difficult to control these people. Even if you are able, if our countries are able to control if they are going to Turkey for vacation or to Turkey to go after to Syria and Iraq, even if you can control some of these people, of course, control some of them when they return to their countries, it is too difficult to separate those who are jihadists, those who are intent to make some attacks here, those who are just disillusioned with what they saw and they are not radicals anymore, including, we know, these kind of individuals are helping our services to dismantle the propaganda coming from ISIS, showing that that is not an idyllic state, that is not so peaceful, and the cause is absolutely unfair. But the question is, these 6,000 people fighting there, these people is particularly dangerous because they have fighting experience, they are radicalized, they have connections with jihadist groups, jihadist elements, and if they want to do jihad and attacks in Europe, they are European citizens, they are not regular criminals, they are not coming from outside. For instance, if someone is coming from Turkey to Italy, arrives right now, and your country knows that he's coming from Syria, but you have no evidence what he did there, what should you do? How can you control it? Now, imagine if you need to control 500 people, 300 people, or 6,000 people across the European Union. And you know, only few of them is coming directly from Turkey to Italy or to Portugal or to France. There are several routes, so it is difficult to control these movements, difficult to control intentions, and if we are succeeding most of the cases, if we fail once and they are succeed, they could provoke a huge tragedy. So this is a different threat, and it is impossible to avoid all kinds of attacks coming from these people returning to their own countries, because they are citizens of Europe. They cannot be expelled to other countries. We can put them in jail for a while. We can surveil their email, their cell phones. We can check their contacts. But if they are smart enough, they can be dormant and then do something. It is too difficult to control this. It's different from the past, where most threats is coming from the outside. People using false documents, false marriages, trying to achieve Europe to a certain point. Now it is difficult because they are European, they're born and were created as Christians, studying in our school. Some of them are well prepared technically, and it's a different stage of jihadism and terrorism, a different stage, a different threat, more diffuse, more difficult to deal with.
I would like to answer you. Why do you think that the Islamic State is so successful in attracting foreign fighters? I mean, maybe even because the Islamic State is very present on the web, so...
Web is one, of course, web is one of the main answers that any person could give you. That doesn't explain everything. And it depends on what kind of foreign fighters are you talking about. Because half of these foreign fighters are coming from North Africa and the Middle East. One of the main reasons why they are going there is because they are fighting Shia. So one of these attacks coming from ISIS or Islamic State is because they are, in their propaganda, justifying a holy war against apostates. So this is a religious and political message that could attract many people. As I told you, half of these foreign fighters is coming from these countries. But of course, ISIS is much more competent in use of the internet, much more than Al-Qaeda was in the past. They are using not only sites, they are using these new media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, as Al-Qaeda never did. And this is attracting many people, many young people. There is no single profile, including for the Western jihadists. But the question is, many of these Western foreign fighters and Western jihadists are being recruited by their own computer. There is not a recruitment and a radicalization based on the prisons or madrasas or mosque anymore. There is also. But now we have also propaganda, recruitment and radicalization in the web, in a scale absolutely amazing that we have never saw. So this is an important part of the question, and that is why in the last few months the government and the services are working with the web industries to avoid some of the contents, to expel some of the messages and images. As you know, not only for recruitment or radicalization, they intend to provoke terror, and they put everything on the web, just like Al-Qaeda and other groups did in the past. But ISIS is another step, and so we need to respond actively, not by reaction only, but by action, doing something more to avoid their use of the web. But just say this: there is no single profile. It is wrong to think that these Western jihadists and foreign fighters are poor people. There are many kinds of motivations to these people go there. some are going there by religious new thinking, that's those so-called express jihadists, okay. Some of them are going there because of the money. ISIS is paying for their fighters. Some of them are going, many of them are going there for the adventure. Some of them are going there not because they are joining a terrorist or a jihadist group, but because they are fighting a dictator like Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Some of them are including going there particularly by humanitarian reasons, more than fighting infidels or barbarians. But there are special cases. For instance, I know a story of a woman, a Portuguese woman, who was trying to reach her son in Syria. She was for twice in Syrian border with Turkey to find her son, and finally she decided to go there inside Syria to be with her son. And she's not a jihadist. It's the risk of a mother trying to find his own son. That is the other problem that we have when we try to analyze the militants of the Islamic State. And it is too difficult to calculate how many are real militants and jihadists fighting for the Islamic State. Because many of the people living under Islamic State control, they are not really militants of ISIS. Probably they are doing things because they are afraid of being killed or imprisoned. Of course, the foreign fighters is a different situation. They are going there because some motivation. But there are millions of people living under ISIS control, and they are not Islamic State supporters or fighters or militants. But in areas where the state failed, there's no previous authority in large parts of Syria and large parts of Iraq. It is a very good context for the expansion of this kind of radical groups. And the same danger we have now in Libya, we have in Lebanon, where ISIS is facing the powerful Hezbollah. We have the problem in Yemen, where ISIS is both facing Al-Qaeda there, as well the Shia militias. But this kind of conflicts and this kind of failed states are sanctuaries for these kind of groups growing up.
Do you think that Tunisia is a country that is under pressure from ISIS, or it's a country that is not...
Let me put the question. Of course it is. Of course it is. Most of the neighbor countries in North Africa and Middle East are under pressure, not only from the Islamic State, as well the Al-Qaeda affiliates. Tunisia is called the exception in the Arab Spring. It's, well, at least to a certain point, the most successful case through democratization. But there are more than 3,000 fighters in Syria and Iraq with the Islamic State. Some strategies are saying that it is better for these countries to leave their own jihadists go there and fight in Iraq and Syria, where they can be killed, then try to avoid or prevent them to go, because the alternative is these people create community supports, groups, pledging bayat to ISIS and doing attacks in these countries. This is true for Tunisia, for Algeria, for Egypt, and elsewhere. Of course, Tunisia is not a collapsed state as Libya is. So, at least in these conditions, if something starts to be wrong in Tunisia, we have a government to deal with, to support, to give money, to finance, to to give weapons, to train their military, just like we are doing in Iraq, and we cannot do in Syria. But Tunisia could be, and it is now, very helpful in fighting this kind of threat, because we are sharing information, we are sending money, we are sending weapons for the government fight their own problem inside and helping us to fight the same threat. Unfortunately, the probably biggest threat to Europe related with jihadism and Islamic State is coming now from Libya. For our own foreign fighters, as I said, but in Libya. We need immediately to solve the Libyan problem. Otherwise, our own problem inside our own security will be
I personally think that one important step in contrasting the Islamic State is to try to reach a solution with the countries that finances it. So I think that these countries could be the Gulf monarchies, for example, Saudi Arabia, but I don't know if it's correct. Do you think that we could find a compromise with the Western countries could find a compromise with these countries?
This compromise was already reached. You're absolutely right. In the past, not only Arab countries and the Sunni monarchies are funding ISIS and many other groups fighting in Syria, as well the United States and European countries and Turkey. Because since 2011 until, I would say, June 2014, in our perspective, all those who are fighting Bashar al-Assad were freedom fighters. We make no distinction between those who are moderates, those who are Democrats, or those who are radicals, those who are jihadists. Because our enemy was Bashar al-Assad, who was supported only by Iran and Russia. So during more than 3 years, many countries in the region and outside the region in the Western, we are supporting these kind of groups. But since mid-2014, particularly with the self-proclamation as caliphate, this really changed. There's no government supporting ISIS. There's no country buying oil to ISIS. There are many references. There are, including from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, including for many religious Islamic authorities repudiate ISIS. So this changed. And now, since the summer 2014, we have a huge geopolitical change in the Middle East, particularly in Syria and Iraq, because of ISIS. And we have this eclectic front against ISIS, where you have Western countries, Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia in first place, Iran, the Kurdish Peshmerga, Turkey, and of course the United States, European countries. So it is strange, it is impossible to think this could be possible before, and it is now. Of course, we are not saying that we are dealing also, cooperate also with Bashar al-Assad, but that is a fact. As you can imagine, more than 3,000 air bombings and no single incident with the Air Force of Syria. There is, of course, there are articulations as there are with Iran. Unfortunately, on the other conflict, in Yemen, we see Saudi Arabia and many Sunni monarchs helping one side, and on the other side is Iran supporting the Houthi Shia. So we need to also see this conflict with attention, because both Al-Qaeda and ISIS is working there.